So Steve Blesinger is a consulting ruminant nutritionist from Sulphur Springs, Texas. Steve and his wife Linda own and operate Reveille Livestock Concepts, a consulting firm that works with a variety of operations in both the beef and dairy industries, as well as a wide variety of companies that serve the animal nutrition industry. For the last 25 years, Steve has assisted a large number of cattle producers in development of nutritional and management programs, which focuses on improving and optimizing animal performance and growing operation profits. Steve's philosophy is to maximize the use of producer on-farm resources or forages and building associated feed and supplementation to best meet animal requirements to promote health, reproduction, and overall performance. He believes that education of producer clients is critical to help them develop a thorough understanding of the importance of nutritional program development and management. Since 1996, Steve has written for numerous cattle industry publications, currently including Progressive Cattleman, Gulf Coast Cattleman, and Progressive Dairyman. Other publications to which he has contributed include The Cattleman, which is TSCRA's publication, Feed Management, Limousine World, The Brahman Journal, Cattle Today, and numerous others. Steve and Linda are both graduates of Texas A&M University. They live on a small farm in Hopkins County, Texas, where they raise Brahmby cattle. They are the parents of 3 grown children, 1 son-in-law, 1 daughter-in-law, 2 dogs, and 3 cats that we may get to glimpse a little bit of today. But Dr. Blesinger has been on several of our programs, and we're so thankful that he was willing to do this for us today. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Blesinger.
Well, thank you, Stacy. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Appreciate the invitation to talk to the group. Really, this have been some interesting times we've been living through. It's not my first Zoom call, but it's the first presentation that I've made like this. So hopefully this will go smoothly. And as Stacy indicated, that we won't have too much input from the dogs and the cats that are running around in the house behind me. So anyway. So, and like Stacy said, if you have questions or anything that you'd like to, or even comments that you'd like to make as we go through this, feel free to put those into the Q&A box, and we'll try to either address them in the course of the discussion or as we get down to the end and have a chance to go through some other questions and discussions and that kind of thing. So I'm going to try to share my screen here and see if we can make this work. And there we go. Modern technology amazes me every day. So we talked about what we're going to do, and as my screen is for whatever reason a little slow, and there we go. Now we're in business, I think. And I need to make one other little adjustment real quick, and we're off to the races. So we're going to talk today about. This won't be the first time that you've heard a discussion on cow-calf nutrition. I mean, anybody that's done this for more than 5 minutes will have had this, have had these discussions. But we need to keep in mind one thing, that cow-calf operations hinge on 3 things. Number 1's management. I mean, that's the time, the effort, the resources that you as producers put into this operation, and it's kind of the overview of everything that goes on. Part of that is the genetics. Those are the animals that you select to go into your operation, whether you breed them, whether you bring them in from outside, whatever the case might be. But that has a major effect on how that operation performs. And then the other major thing is nutrition. And nutrition is, obviously one of your, aside from the investment in land, aside from the investment in the cattle themselves, and aside from maybe like equipment, tractors, trucks, things like that, it's going to be one of the major variable inputs that you're going to have in your cattle operation. It is also one of the major things that affects how that operation performs. as I started to say a second ago, anyone that's been in the cattle for more than about 5 minutes and have had discussions, and you've read articles or listened to presentations, or had been in the coffee shop, and you've had this discussion about the importance of nutrition, the importance of good or sound or well balanced. And all of these concepts are true. And the thing is, as I've gone through this and been doing this for almost 30 years now, I guess I have found that the need for a solid nutrition program is, way more true than a lot of people actually realize. This presentation is meant to encourage you to consider not only what sound nutrition is for your cattle operation, but also to kind of walk you down into and the understanding of how some things really work and how the decisions you make will affect processes, and the results. And we're also going to look at the things that you put in, the pluses, and also the things that are taken out that we have to manage for. But at the end of the day, what we want to do is we want to give you an opportunity to step back and take a look at what does a sound, balanced nutrition program look like on your cattle operation. And the thing is that I can tell you, being on lots and lots of farms and ranches over the years, there's no two of them that are the same. Okay. One thing we need to keep in mind is the cost of what a compromised nutritional program really is. When we don't have in place a good program, what we see are things like poor reproduction, delayed calving. The calving is delayed, mostly because we're not getting cows bred in time, or in a timely fashion. We see depressed growth and development, cattle that are not, they just don't grow and gain the way they're supposed to. And at the end of the day, if you're selling calves off of your farm, you're not selling as many pounds of beef as you should be. Reduced health performance. Nutrition and health are tied together completely. With a poor nutrition program or a compromised nutrition program, you're not going to see the health performance on those cattle the way you normally would. And what that means is more medicine cost, more trips to the vet, more trips for the vet out to your place, things like that. And in this day and time, those can be extremely expensive. The net effects, like I said a second ago, it's just less pounds of beef at a much higher cost of production. And a lot of folks that I've worked with over the years, their thought is, well, if I don't spend as much on mineral, or if I don't spend as much on protein supplementation, that is reducing my cost. Yeah, it may very well be reducing the cost up to a point, and then it starts costing you an awful lot in terms of lost production. All right, getting it right. What does it mean if we get it right? Well, it's just the opposite. We see improved reproduction. We see timely calving, cattle that are bred, calves that are born on time, that stay within the breeding, your breeding cycle, breeding periods. You see the improved growth and performance. That can have a major effect on how much how much beef you're selling. Improved health performance. And we're moving into a day and time where we really are. Excuse me, just a second, guys. Folks, rather, we're moving into a day and time where we're under more pressure to reduce our use of antibiotics and of various drugs. And what we're finding is that proper nutritional performance or proper nutritional input will help us improve health performance, and it helps us reduce those health-related costs. And finally, at the end of the day, what we see is more pounds of beef at a better production cost. So, okay. Oh, sorry. On to the next. So, pluses. What are we putting into your nutritional program, and how do we evaluate that? We think about it as a constant, and it is. It's a constant input of various resources that go, that go into the animal, that give her or him or that calf what they need in order to perform. So let's start at the beginning. We're not going to talk immediately about, how do we feed a cow? How do we supplement a cow? Let's take a few steps back for a second and sort of take a look at how that really begins. From the point of conception, when the genetic material of that animal is put together, it has an absolute need for basic nutrients: protein, energy, fat, minerals, and vitamins. Now, let me qualify one thing. Fat is in and of itself not considered a major or one of the basic nutrients. It's a component nutrient that provides energy, but the more we have studied this, the more that we're learning how important fat and fatty acids are for knitting together that animal, at the from the point of conception on. These make up, again, those nutrients make up the structural components of the developing animal from the very beginning, when the sperm and ova connect at fertilization, when the DNA is combined and the cellular division begins to create that conceptus. Okay, after fertilization, again, I'm probably telling you things that you guys know already, but I just want to sort of create a pathway of how the nutrient flow into the animal starts. So after fertilization, the conceptus travels down the oviduct toward the uterus. This is kind of biology, 8th grade biology here, while continuing to divide without actually increasing in size or mass. That conceptus is not really getting any bigger at that point, but it is adding more cells to that unit. This takes several days in order for this to take place. And then when it reaches the right stage of development and the proper location in the uterus, the conceptus implants into the lining of the uterus and becomes the embryo. So this is the stage where the real connection between the new calf and the cow occurs, as it implants into the endometrial lining of the uterus and begins the embryonic stage of development. So this right here is where the connection is made, and when that cow starts feeding that calf. So up to the point in time, the developing conceptus, that little wad of cells, really requires no nutritional input. It's kind of floating around out there, doing its cellular division and multiplication. It is carrying some inherent nutrients at that point, which allows it to do what it's doing. Once the embryo is attached to the lining of the uterus, the blood system begins to develop, and this allows the cow to start providing everything for that new developing embryo. And with the connected bloodstream, the nutrients become available for enhanced, and I say enhanced, but it's just what's necessary for basic cellular, tissue, and organ development. I've done a lot of work over the last few years on the concept called fetal development, or fetal development, fetal programming, developmental programming, lots of different names for that. And basically we're trying to understand is how important it is to provide the necessary nutrients for that cow in order for her to convey that to the calf, so that that calf is developing the way it's supposed to. And we're talking about, concepts of understanding when some of these tissues and organs start developing. Understanding that they have, research has shown that you can detect a heartbeat in as few as 23 days post-conception. There's an awful lot of things happening awfully fast. Oops, sorry. Okay, so the research has found that that how we manage that pregnant female's diet has a direct effect on the long-term performance of the offspring, both positive and negative, even from the point of conception. A lot of this work kind of goes back to some research that was done back in the end of World War II, where some doctors were evaluating actually some towns, or a particular town in Holland, that where the nutrient or the food had been severely restricted. And what they found was that in the babies that were born after this period of time where their moms had gone through all this, had a much higher incidence in things like obesity, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, a whole variety of problems. And that's where we started realizing that how that mother is provided for nutritionally has a direct effect not only on that developing conceptus and embryo and fetus, but it has an effect on that young person or calf in this case for the rest of its life. There's also some thought that this effect is even transgenerational. And what that means is that the dam, or maybe even the granddam or the grandsire, was somehow or another compromised when it was in utero, but when it was just a fetus and a developing calf, and that subsequently that affects other next generations of these calves as we go down the line. So it's something long term and something that that has to be considered, particularly if your operation, if you plan on being in the cattle business for a long period of time. Okay. Now, in livestock production settings, lack of proper nutrition can often occur during gestation. It's not uncommon when that cow is, maybe dry, it's not nursing a calf. I'll be honest with you, we see this a lot in the dairy industry when cattle that are not lactating, all they're doing is they're walking around carrying a calf. There's an awful lot of time where we see compromised nutrition during that period. This is not unusual during the first 2 trimesters, except the fact that is when most people those cows are nursing calves, and so the folks, so the producer or the manager is watching that, and so they want that calf well taken care of. We don't, in a lot of cases, we don't necessarily provide properly for that cow, especially in the 3rd trimester, even though we know that that's when the bulk of the fetal growth actually develops. But the point is that those critical nutrients are important for that cow and for that calf from the very, very beginning. Oh, sorry about that. Okay. A substandard nutrient environment, in other words, cows aren't receiving the nutritional support that they need to be, can result in possible negative fetal programming responses. And this can be due to several different factors. There's several things that can cause this aside from them just not, getting enough groceries. Breeding of heifers who compete for the nutrients with the rapidly growing fetal systems. In other words, you've bred that heifer, she's still growing, so her body actually competes with that developing fetus for those nutrients. Another one is we see increased incidence, or in the event of increased incidences of multiple fetuses. In other words, twins, triplets. On occasion we even see bigger numbers than that. But anything outside of a single birth for a cow, there's competition for those nutrients. We see the selection of it for increased milk production. Again, over on the dairy side, this is the big focus for the dairyman. She's looking at increased milk production, but we also do that on the beef side of things as well. And because the cow's body partitions or selects for how it uses those nutrients, that selection for the increased milk production also competes for those nutrients that would go for fetal development and placenta growth. Breeding of livestock during high and low environmental temperatures. Trying to get cows bred or breeding cows when it's either very cold or very hot is seldom a good situation. And it does tend to inhibit or depress nutrient intake by the cow and subsequently by the calf. And then finally, pregnancy occurs during periods of poor pasture or feeding conditions. Over the last few years, we've been through any number of drought periods, and breeding cows and carrying a pregnancy during drought always has long-term effects, particularly on those calves. It's not necessarily well documented, but it does happen regularly. Okay, so here's some strategies to positively influence dam and embryo fetal nutrition. In other words, you're focused in on a good nutrition program is going to focus in on how to provide necessary nutrients, not only for the cow, but also for that developing fetus from conception on. First, well, I'm a little bit self-serving here, but work with a nutritionist to ensure your feeding program is as balanced as possible. Your forages cannot be too good. You want to use good management on farm-grown forages. You want to inoculate silages. You want to utilize like a fed enzyme product to enhance digestibility. All those things that can go into making your forage base, and that can be whether it's pasture, whether it is hay, whether it's silage, haylage, whatever the case might be, those forages cannot be too good. Focus on protein quality. Protein is one of the basic, and it was top of the list that I showed you a while ago, but protein is probably one of the single most important nutrients that we need to focus on. We have a lot of discussion about protein. We talk about amounts of protein. In other words, I'm going to buy 20% protein cube, and that's what I need to feed. Well, maybe, but maybe not. There may be other things that come involved, and the quality of that protein is a big part of that. Balance your mineral and vitamin programs and work to improve mineral availabilities. Your mineral program is the core, or is the foundation that everything in your nutritional program is based on. If you are not supplementing anything else, you absolutely need to supplement mineral and vitamins, because it's easy for that to be out of balance. And it has a direct effect on the cow and on that developing calf. Consider using an injectable trace mineral source. Injectables, and there's pretty much, I guess, just Multimin on the market at this point in time. But, that will overcome some absorption issues. It'll overcome some intake issues. And it's a good part of a sound program. It doesn't replace a fed mineral program, but it does have a place in the overall program. And then work on minimizing stretch as much as possible, especially during warmer months. And we'll talk about the heat stress and things like that a little bit later on. All right, determining requirements. This is probably, for most producers, one of the most difficult parts of developing a sound nutrition program. And the big part of this is the variables. We have variables in cattle and cattle types, variables in pastures and forages. We have variables in production conditions. There are so many moving parts of this, so many moving pieces. It is such a moving target that it is a challenge, and it's a challenge for everybody. And then the question becomes, okay, with all these variables, how do you coordinate that? How do you establish the numbers, or establish the the protein, the energy, the mineral requirements that those animals need? Okay, just want to show you something for a second. Just talking about different breeds here, and obviously there's awful lot of commercial producers, which with all the various different combinations, we end up with just a whole variety of circumstances that we have to try to work with. But when we start looking at the different breeds, and we look at how we have they've researched and generated a number for average or typical birth weights and average or typical milk production, both of those will have an effect, or directly affect, nutrient requirements for this cow. So one of the things you have to identify is, okay, what kind of cow do I have? Or if you are a purebred breeder, recognize that Angus is different from Charolais, is different from Limousine, is different from Santa Gertrudis, and those things come into play when you're establishing those nutrient requirements. Okay, so where do we get the nutritional information from? Lots of different sources out there. I'm showing the 2000 version of the nutrient requirements for beef cattle. I think there's a version of that that's 2016, if I'm not mistaken. Publications like Feedstuffs, Drovers comes out with something. A lot of the universities have generate, I guess you could say, nutrient requirement tables for varieties of different types of cattle, sizes of cattle, production groups, whatever the case might be. So there's lots and lots of sources that are out there. And what I encourage the folks that I work with is, start looking through that, start perusing those things. Sometimes it's a little challenge to understand, but there's folks like the extension people that are out there, university people that are out there, feed company nutritionists, folks such as myself that can help you navigate through that, that massive amount of information. Okay, so one of the things that we need to do, again, we're trying to establish what the requirements is. And the first thing is, in doing that, is we have to define what you have. You need to take a look at what that group of cows is that's running around on your place, and what that animal really looks like, or what those different animals really look like. Number one, type of cows. Are you looking at crossbred, purebred? And then if you're looking at crossbred, or either way, what breeds or breed combinations are you working with? What's the average size of a mature cow? A cow weighs has a mature weight of 1,000 pounds or has a mature weight of 1,400 pounds have some pretty dramatically different nutrient requirements. Obviously, that bigger animal, she's going to require more protein, more energy to get to her place, where her genetics say that she's supposed to be. What's her milking capacity? Is she a high milking cow? Is she a low milking cow, medium? And then you have to look at it kind of as your overall herd. What on the average is their milking capability? Average size and the age of your heifers at breeding. Are you looking at, do you work with a herd of cows where your typical breeding age on these heifers is 700 pounds? Is it 800 pounds, 1,000 pounds? All of those things will have an effect. What's the average age of the cow in the herd? I was working with a producer here not too long ago, and we were discussing that. He thought, the average age of my cow is, my cows are about 5 years old. Once we started digging into his records, realized that wasn't the case. His average age of his cows were probably closer to 8, and that difference in age does have an effect on their requirements. How are the cows bred? Do you have a specific breeding season? Are you breeding those cows in the in the spring? Are you breeding them in the fall? Are you breeding them year round? When? Because that has an effect on the timing of the nutrient availability from your forages. I can tell you that year-round breeding makes it a whole lot more difficult to try to establish what those cows really need, because you've got a little bit of everything at any given point in time. How the cows grouped, or are they grouped? Are you grouping them by, pregnant developing heifers, just newly calved cows that have not yet been bred? There's differences there. The better you can group them, the better off, or the easier it is to establish those nutrient requirements. Okay. Again, in trying to determine the requirements, recognize that you have one or more of all of those groups, or one of all of the groups at any given point in time. uh, these are more than likely you're going to have all of these, and that doesn't include your bulls. It doesn't include your, maybe if you've got some weaned growing steers or something like that. These are all the different types of cattle that you can potentially have. And again, the better or the more, I guess, the better you can group these cattle, the better off you're going to be able to provide for their nutrition requirements. Each group has a somewhat different set of requirements, and that's something that's very important to recognize. All right, we mentioned a second ago some of the different types of resources that are out there. Here's one of the tables. This came from Oklahoma State. Some of the data that they provided, and it just goes to show you some of the differences that we see at different stages of production. If we only look at that first on the top, look at that 1,200-pound mature cow, good body condition score 5, and you're trying to maintain her weight. If you look at the first trimester, this is after she's been bred, after she's got a calf, after she's been bred, but you look at that crude protein value, and she's requires 3 protein every day. She gets into her second trimester. The calf is not the calf she's pregnant with is not growing that fast. The calf that she has on her side is not sucking quite as much. Her protein requirements go down quite a bit. And then once she gets into her third trimester, and my internet connection is not very stable, but her third trimester, the crude protein jumps back up to 1.6. We see that same thing over here with the pregnant heifer. We see variations in that. We see variations in the calcium phosphorus requirements, and definitely over in the energy requirements. So what stage of production she's in is very important to recognize. Okay, determining supply. Everything on any production system, you have the demand side and you have the supply side. And unless you're out there dry lighting your cow-calf operation, a big part of that is going to be the forage base that you're working with. You have to take a look at what do you have. What kind of forage base are you working with, and is this, and we have to look at, I'm a big advocate of forage testing, and we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Look at pastures, in the spring, in the summer, in the early fall, over here, all during the growing seasons. Composition, or is it a improved pasture? Is it native? Is it, what type of grass species are you working with? Every cow, you've probably heard the saying going that we're not cattlemen, we're grass farmers. And that is exactly right. We grow grass and we use the cows to harvest that grass and turn it into something with a little more value. Volume is largely affected by moisture conditions, and it'll also be affected by what that grass type is. Is it something that will if when it gets dry, is it real susceptible to the drought, or does it tolerate the drought? Fertility, what kind of a fertility program are you using, or are you using a fertility program? This can vary a lot. Folks using commercial fertilizers, lots of parts of the world that fertilize heavily with chicken litter, just a variety of different things. Done some work in this particular area that I can tell you and can pass on is that building organic matter in your soil has a huge effect on how well your grasses respond and how well, what kind of volume and what kind of composition you're looking at. Okay, fall and winter, how do you deal with fall and winter? Is that something where you're feeding a storage forage? Is it hay? Is it haylage? Is it silage? Or maybe it's a stockpiled forage where you've left 6 or 8 inches of grass growing out there, or then finally, are you putting in winter pastures? And what I can tell you is along with the effectiveness of each of these types of forages in meeting those cows' nutrient demand, there's a cost that comes with that. And it makes sense to spend some time and assessing how much does it cost to produce the amount of forage needed for whatever the number of cows that you're trying to produce, in this situation. Okay. Something that's extremely important is to recognize that forage nutrients change. And why do these changes occur? Well, number one, nutrient values of growing plants change as they mature. That's why you've heard the discussions on when you're needing to cut your hay, and like we say, Bermuda grass, the kind of the rule of thumb is you want to be able to sure and cut it every 21 to 28 days. Well, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But the point being is that the older that grass gets, the more mature, the bigger that it gets, the more fiber components develop in that grass, and it dilutes out things like the protein content. So the longer, that's why you'll see cutting a Bermuda hay field at 21 days compared to cutting it at 35 days, that 35-day Bermuda is probably going to be quite a bit lower in protein than it would have been earlier. The other thing is because the fiber content that we can measure increases the more mature that plant gets. It makes that plant less digestible. So older, more mature plants, not only are they lower in critical nutrients like protein, they're also higher in less digestible nutrients, things that have an effect on how much that cat can eat, how much she can digest, things of that nature. We know the pastures can change as different species become more prevalent over a growing season. Native pastures in particular, and this has an awful lot to do with how you manage that. So, there are differences in one type of plant species as compared to another. We change from one feeding source to another. In other words, if we go from winter pastures to hay or haylage to ryegrass, I think I said winter pastures, I'm sorry. Summer pastures to hay and haylage to ryegrass to summer pastures, we see changes in those nutrient profiles of those different forages. I mentioned earlier that forage sampling and analysis is very important. This is one of my soapbox things. My point to the folks that I work with is that you can't feed or you can't supplement, sorry about that, when you don't know what you're working with. If you don't know what your grasses contain, if you don't know what your hays contain, then you really don't know how to accurately supplement, or even if you need some. And we'll take a look at that here in just a little bit more. But a good hay probe, whether it's a push-in type like the one I'm showing there, or a drill type, whatever the case might be, is one of the single best investments that you can make on the farm. My two recommendations for producers is the two best you can make. One is a hay probe to where you can do regular forage testing, and the other is a set of scales. And the point being is that you can't manage what you don't measure. And so that I'm throwing that in there, even though we're not going to really get into it. But forage sampling and analysis gives you a tremendous amount of information in terms of what you're working with. Okay, this is a typical analysis from getting, say, hay tested. This has actually been around I've been using this one a pretty good while, mainly because it does such a good job of comparing what I want to show you. If you take a look at the two grass hay samples, and these are both one left, the dry matter crude protein is 8.957%. On the sample on the right is 6.29%. So these two samples were pulled from two different inventories of hay on the same day, analyzed at the same time, but we've got pretty significant differences in just the forage protein content. Again, like I said, sample 1, 8.96, sample 2, 6.3. The difference between those two is 2.66 percentage points. The sample 2 is 30% lower in protein than what sample 1 is. There's no way you can tell that by just simply looking at that hay. You just can't. It's not possible at all. And so you have a cow that may be eating 25 pounds of dry matter from either one of those hays. In sample 1, it's providing it is providing 2.24 pounds of protein. Sample 2, 1.58 pounds. There's a big difference. Sorry about that. There's a big difference between those two hay supplies. Okay, so let's go back to our table that we looked at just a minute ago. And we're going to start off by looking at that first trimester cow. That first trimester cow requires 3.4 pounds of protein. Remember from the previous slide, the first hay sample provided 2.24. The second hay sample provided 1.58. So with sample 1, she's only 1.16 pounds of protein short. In sample 2, she's 1.82 pounds of protein short. So she's 0.6. If you're trying to feed sample 2, you need 0.66 pounds more than if you were feeding sample 1. Okay, so if sample 1, if it requires supplementation of if you're feeding hay from that first supply that was providing, you had a shortage of 1.16 pounds through that first trimester, here's some ways that you can accomplish. How do you supplement for that? Number 1, you can feed 20% range cubes. This is going to require, in order to get your 1.16 pounds of protein, it's going to require feeding 5.8 pounds of cubes per head per day. Those 20% cubes, in order to get 1.16 pounds of protein, it's going to require 5.8 pounds of cubes. You can feed a 30% tub. In order to meet that protein requirement, when you're feeding that hay, you're going to have to feed 3.86 pounds of that 30% tub. If you're feeding a 35% liquid, this is going to require feeding 3.31 pounds of the liquid. All right, now switch over, and if you're now feeding sample 2 to those first trimester cows, you now have to supplement 1.82 pounds of protein per head per day. If you're feeding the cubes, that's going to require, in order to meet that shortage, you're going to have to feed 9.1 pounds of cubes. If you're feeding that tub, it's going to take 6.1 pounds of that tub per head per day. The 35% liquid, it's going to take 5.2 pounds of the liquid per head per day. So as you can see, it can take a significant amount of supplementation in order just to meet the protein requirement for that cow. So when we compare the cow's requirements and the proteins and the forage supplies, we see the importance of recognizing several things. We see the differences in requirements between the animals and animal groups. We see how these differences change as the animal ages and she goes through different stages of production. In other words, compare that heifer to that cow. The differences in forage nutrient supply when we looked at those two different hay samples, and how the forages with different nutrient densities should be matched with cattle production groups as best possible. If you know which your hay supplies will test that, you can match feeding those hay supplies to those groups of cows that have higher levels, have higher nutrient requirements, and it will reduce how much you have to supplement. Matching forages and production groups, they help reduce the amount of purchase supplementation and thus the amount of added cost. And then the better job we do of producing quality forages, the more we can reduce added supplementation. I can take you to different operations that do such a good job on their forage production that they supplement next to nothing. Mineral, and that's about it. Okay, determine your feed and supplement program. So what are your resources? We know that you're going to have to, if you have forage tested and you know you're going to have to feed something, What does that look like? So what are your resources? What kind of storage do you have? How much labor do you have? How much equipment do you have? How much money do you have? And if you're in the cattle business these days, that may not be as big of a number as it used to be. Who are your suppliers or your potential suppliers? You know, are you going to work with a local feed store? Or are you going to work with someone that can deliver product to you? There's lots and lots of different variables here as well. And it's going to vary every year to year. You need to evaluate on an ongoing basis. And what I mean by this is that statement really is there to tell you two things. Number one, and I've heard this any number of times before, you can't just do it the way Daddy or Granddad did. You can't do it the way you didn't necessarily do it the way you did it last year or the year before that, because everything changes every year. Your nutrition and supplement program, like we showed in that earlier slide, is a moving target, and it has to be evaluated continuously. Okay, so some of the different options that you've got, and most everybody will already recognize this. You got Range Cubes. That's kind of the go-to protein supplement, and they'll range. I mean, 20% is the typical amount value or typical analysis, but they can be higher or lower. Commodities, whole cottonseed, distiller's grain, corn gluten feed, any of those things. They can be extremely good for supplementing. My personal opinion, whole cottonseed is almost the perfect cow supplement. Other types of feeds, there's a wide range of different feeds that you can provide: pellets, loose or textured mixes, meals, things of that nature. Intake limiters. There's quite a bit of work on the intake limiting side of thing. You know, for years and years we've used salt limited mixes, but we have some more advanced intake limiting technologies that are quite effective, but they're also quite expensive. You know, tubs and blocks. Tubs and blocks have gotten to be the thing to go to, and it is purely a convenience thing. Tubs and blocks routinely are more expensive than other types of supplements, but they do simplify the supplementation process. You can go out and buy a couple of tubs, dump them out, and you're good to go for a week or two. Liquid feeds. I'm personally a pretty big proponent of liquid feeds. There are some real opportunities to really reduce supplementation costs, and it can work pretty well. Generally, the products that save labor are more expensive. The more labor savings that goes into this, the more cost you're gonna run into. And so we need to take that into consideration. Look at this. This is I got this kind of from a going to a review site for restaurants. So the lower the number of dollar signs, the cheaper it is. Commodities are the cheapest as far as actually buying that commodity. But there's some limitations. You have to have storage. You have to have a way of handling it. In most cases, you have to be able to take, if not a truckload, then a larger volume. In a lot of cases, it takes way more handling than other products. Then you get into the other one, the liquid feeds. They set a feeder, they fill your feeder up. Liquids, in terms of cost per unit of protein, are generally considerably less expensive. Range Cubes and other feeds are going to be pretty moderate. They're going to be more expensive than liquids. And then the blocks and the tubs are considerably higher, and then the intake limiting feeds are generally quite a bit higher. So anyway, again, anytime that you have a product, you're looking at a product to save labor, you can pretty much count on it costing you a little more money.
Hi, Dr. Blesinger.
Yes, ma'am.
I had a question. There's another question in there, but I think we can get to it at the end. But this one is kind of, it's around these products you're talking about now. So
sure.
What is the difference between whole cottonseed and cottonseed hulls?
Okay, whole cottonseed. I'll go back up here and we'll take a look at that handy dandy picture. Okay, what you're seeing there, that middle picture, is whole cottonseed. It is the intact seed with lint still attached that comes out of the ginning process. It's essentially a byproduct from ginning cotton. Cottonseed hulls are when they take that whole cottonseed and they crush that seed, number one, because they're trying to get the oil out of there. You may have heard of, cottonseed oil used for a variety of different purposes. But what it does is you extract the inside of the seed, which gives you cottonseed meal. And then the other side of it, you get cottonseed hulls. And the hulls are just the outside of that seed. From a nutrient standpoint, whole cottonseed runs around 20% protein. It'll run around 17 or 18% fiber. It'll run probably 17, 18% fat. Cottonseed hulls run about 4% protein. They run about 30 to 40% fiber. They have maybe 2.5% fat. It'll vary quite a bit. You can actually find, on a more limited basis, you can also find some delinted whole cottonseed. A lot of times that is seed that did not make the grade for planting purposes. It's too small. They're broken. There's a variety of different things. But there's actually quite a number of different cotton products that are available for use. But that's the difference between whole cottonseed and cottonseed hulls. We feed cottonseed hulls as a fiber source, and because they are very, very palatable, especially the calves. Calves seem to really, really, it's kind of, it's just they seem to like the texture of that material in their mouth. So that's the difference in those two.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's go back to, again, we've covered, again, remember that when your cost of your nutrients or cost of your different feed sources, supplement sources, the more processed and the more they are geared toward convenience, the more expensive they're going to be. Okay. So here's another example of that. So I'm going to compare the feeding rates and the relative cost of different types of supplements. You remember a while ago, we were looking at that forage source that was, where we needed to supplement about 1.15 pounds of protein. So let's take a look at the cost difference of different supplements and what it will cost you in order to get that done. So, like I said, down at the bottom, I rounded it. I made it 1.15 just to make it a little bit easier. But and I showed an example, 1.15 pounds divided by 20%. Well, that's a 20% all-natural range cube, where your normal feeding rate, you're normally hand feed it. That's what the HF stands for, at about 4 pounds. But in order to meet that 1.15 pounds of protein, you're going to have to feed 5.75 pounds. Okay. Cost per ton. Now this was actually something I pulled from an article I wrote last fall. So these numbers may be a little bit old, but I think they're still fairly accurate. Cost per ton of those 20% cubes was $350 at the time. So the cost to feed that cow, the 5.75 pounds, was 1.01 cent per head per day. Well, then, if we looked at another way to supplement that cow with maybe a 30% 3-in-1 salt and meal mix, again, about 4 pounds is typical self-feeding. She'll consume with a 3-to-1 salt meal. That cow will eat about 4 pounds. She needs to eat 3.83, so she would actually hit that number. The cost was around $396, but the cost for ton is $396 per head per day. 0.76, so it's about a quarter cheaper. We looked at an all-natural cooked tub. So top end, self-fed intake is about a pound. Protein content is 24%. She really, in order to meet her nutrient requirements, she needs to eat about 4.8 pounds of that tub. So she's eating a pound of it. She's not gonna meet that requirement. Cost per ton on those tubs is $850 a ton. So the cost per head per day, if you could get the 4.8 pounds into her, was $2.04. Of a poured tub, they're a little softer. The intake is higher. 2 pounds per head per day, self-fed. you'll need, but like the cubes, you need 5.75 pounds. Cost per ton, $5.50. Cost per head per day, $1.58. Liquid feed, 35% liquid feed. You know, the liquid feeds run higher in NPN or urea. Typical intake is about 2 pounds, self-fed. You really need about 3.28 pounds, but it's considerably cheaper at $285 a ton. And I've seen some. These kind of tend to be all over the board, so they can run considerably more expensive than that. But the cost per head per day of this product is 46 cents per head. Whole cottonseed, we just talked about that. 4 pounds, you know, they'll run about 20% protein content. You still need to feed about 575 to hit that 1.15. At that point, cost on it was $320, and cost per head per day was 92 cents. And then finally, distillers grains. You've heard of DDGs. They run 28% protein. They also run higher in fat. They run about an 8% fat content. You'll need to feed about 4 pounds. These were $225 at the time, and the cost per head per day was 46 cents. So what you see in looking at all these different supplementation types, pretty dramatic difference in the amount of cost in order to get this done. Okay, we talked about the pluses, how we're putting into that cow what she needs, and a little bit on how to calculate some of that. Now let's talk about the minuses. Let's look at the things that are pulling some things out. Stacy, I see a question up there. I'm gonna see if I can see what your question says. What is the meal mix recipe? We'll get up to that top one here in just a second. What's the meal mix recipe? If you're talking about the that salt and meal mix product, if you talk about that salt and meal mix, it's pretty simple. It is 75% cottonseed meal and 25% salt. And that's a very, very basic, very simple, you know, type of a formula. I know a lot of companies are modifying that. They'll add a mineral and vitamin package. They may use some other ingredients to try to reduce the cost. But that's, you know, that's the very, that's kind of the very basics of it. Okay, back to the minuses. We're going to look at what are the things that will pull the nutrients out of, out of this. And guys, I'm going to apologize to you. I'm going to run a little over on this. So we're going to go on my presentation. It'll go a little bit more than an hour. Hopefully that won't be too much of a problem for y'all. Okay. So what am I doing here? All right, just the way we manage what we put into that animal to meet the requirements, we have to manage what is taken out and compensate for that. And so there's a whole variety of factors that act as a drain on nutrients. You know, one thing's stress, and we see that predominantly as environmental stress. A lot of it, heat, cold, drought, excessive rain, and mud. I can promise you right now, in a lot of parts of Texas where we're getting an awful lot of rain, we've got some mud, probably some mud stress going on. Handling, poor facilities, untrained handling, those things create an awful lot of stress on a cow. Excessive use of dogs, use of four-wheelers, uses of hot shots, poorly designed facilities, all of those things are very stressful for the animal. Transportation, if you're loading that cow, hauling her down the road, that's going to create, stress on her. And all of those things pull nutrients out of that animal. Okay. Health issues, disease, hoof and foot issues, difficult calving. Again, all of those, because for one thing, what happens with health problems, we see a reduction in feed intake. Cows just don't get out there. They don't graze as well. They may not eat supplements as well. That's going to have a problem. But at the same time, that stress does have a reductive effect on the nutrients that that animal has consumed. Parasites, internal and external. This is an area that I've focused an awful lot on the last few years, and we're going to talk about a little bit more. They are a definite drain to what you're trying to put into that cow. Okay, Let's talk about internal parasites. They've been an issue for cattle producers forever. They've got a significant and a significant and expensive drain of nutrients, and they've also been shown to suppress the immune response or the immune system. Here's some different points to keep in mind. They're a problem in every herd. And even if you've got a pretty aggressive treatment and control program, they're still there. It's still ongoing, and it is still recurring. Young animals tend to be more susceptible to infestation and the subsequent problems that develop. Cows are a little more resistant, but they can still suffer significant effects, especially if you're in a pasture that has got a heavy parasite load. There's no treatment that's foolproof. Parasites will develop kind of a degree of resistance to the same dewormer. If you use Ivomec every time, those worms are going to develop some resistance to Ivomec. And I have absolutely nothing. I've used Safeguard for years. It's a great product, but it is going to be limited in how long it's going to be effective against wormers that are in the rumen or in the stomach or in the digestive system. It's going to have a limited period of time. Some of the systemic wormers, the injectables, the porons, excuse me, are going to last in that animal's system for a longer period of time. You need to understand how long a given product or program is truly effective. Deworming once per year is not going to do a very good job of controlling internal parasites. They need to be coupled with appropriate timing and placement on cattle of less infested pastures. Be honest with you, right now, this time of the year, when it's getting warm, there's a lot of moisture, that type of thing is probably the toughest time of the year. Treatment of the year, conditions of drought, excessive rainfall can increase or decrease the problem. We get later into say July, early August, where it's drier, hotter. The worm population in those pastures is not going to be as high. Treatment may not be a positive investment if you don't time it right, or you'd use a product that is not suitable for what you're trying to control. Okay, if we look at it from a purely nutritional standpoint, we can summarize several things. Internal parasites impact the nutritional status of the animal. Decreases feed intake, decreases nutrient absorption, and it increases the nutrient requirements of the animal. These things will, in fact, consume some of the nutrients that you're putting into that animal. And through those mechanisms, they impact protein, energy, vitamin, and mineral status of the animal. Reduced nutrient intake and absorption is really, really detrimental in highly stressed cattle. So if you have an animal with a high internal parasite load that's being heat stressed, and you're going to haul it down the road, you've got some problems. The poor nutritional status of the animal infected with parasites will contribute to the inability for it to respond to a microbial disease challenge. As I said earlier, it will depress immune response, and it's been well documented that that's the case. Then animals infected with parasites also have fewer nutrients available for growth, milk production, reproduction, everything. Okay. Let's talk about external parasites for a bit. These are also been an issue for a long, long time. We generally think about flies, but this also includes lice, ticks, mosquitoes, grubs. There's a whole variety of bugs that can drain blood on the animal. They consume nutrients, they inflict pain, and they are just a nuisance for the animal in general. Like we said, flies, horn flies, face flies, stable flies, house flies, grubs. Grubs are bot flies, ticks, lice, mosquitoes, fleas, mites. There are actually over 15,000 species of flies in the United States alone. We focus on a minute number of them. Okay, let's talk about just the flies and the economic impact for a second. In general, 4 species of flies cause approximately $4.2 billion to the U.S. cattle industry every year. Horn flies will cost about $1 billion. Face flies cost about $230 million. House flies cost about $750 million. Stable flies will cost about $2.2 billion. Stable flies by far, even though we haven't necessarily recognized those as much in recent years, are in fact our biggest problem. So if we look at different ways that we can control fly methods, okay, one of them, kind of the go-to for years, have been ear tags. Lots of different manufacturers, lots of different chemicals. The flies will develop a resistance, and they honestly have a relatively short effective period. I'm not trying to cause an argument with the tag manufacturers, but most of the time we see pretty reduced effectiveness after about 45 days. And so if fly tags are going to work real well, you're going to have to go back and re-tag them. Sprays, lots of different sprays, even dust. Both of these can be applied by hand, or they can be applied on a back rubber of some type. And these are generally affected by weather and rainfall. Again, this is something you're going to have to do on a regular basis. Okay, another area that I've worked quite a bit on here in recent years have been with some of the feed-through products. These are some chemicals that have been designed to feed through in minerals, tubs, feeds. They affect either the life cycle or the development of the fly larvae in the manure. It prevents the larvae, or prevents the eggs that develop into larvae from hatching and becoming mature flies. Probably the most common, the most well-known, we've all heard of IGRs. IGR has been established for a number of years. The active product is called S-methoprene. The product name is Alticid. It probably still has the lion's share of the market out there. It's the most common. The second one that has been used in confinement feeding situations, been used in dairies a lot, is a chemical called diflubenzuron. There are two products out there, Justifly and Clarifly. The Clarifly is made by the same company as Alticid, and Justifly is a standalone product, I guess you'd say. Both of those work. And we'll talk about them here just a little bit more. Another product that's actually been around quite a while is Raybon. It is, for whatever reason, just hasn't captured the imagination of producers and feed and mineral companies like the other products have. But these are the feed-through. They're very safe, and they are designed to eliminate or dramatically reduce the larvae, the fly larvae that develops in the manure. Okay, let's talk about this, and this is actually designed to show you the difference between methoprene and diflubenzuron in this situation. Stable flies, like we said, the cost of stable flies is about $2.21 billion. If we work that out onto average of a per animal basis, when you look at the average cost to a cow on your operation, the cost of stable flies is probably around $23.5. Stable flies, you will see they're grouped around down on the belly, down on the legs. You'll see a lot of stomping. You'll see a lot of cattle laying down when they ought to be grazing. You'll see cattle getting into water, into ponds. That's when you have a stable fly process. Methoprene does not control stable flies. Diflubenzuron does. Horn flies, that's kind of what we're all accustomed to. It's still very much of a problem. $1 billion a year, $11.25 per head. Methoprene does control horn flies, and so does diflubenzuron. House flies, we don't really think about house flies very much, but house flies really have a propensity for transmitting disease. They are a big problem in transmitting things like E. coli, salmonella, things of that nature, and they're not as much of a problem as the previous two, but they're still a problem. Diflubenzuron controls this one, and then face flies, which are also pretty common. Also not quite as much of a problem, probably the smaller of the four. Methoprene does not control it, but diflubenzuron does. So one thing we're seeing is a move in the industry toward using more diflubenzuron, just simply because it's effective on more species of flies, and improves our control all over. Total, if you're with no control whatsoever, you're looking at the cost to that animal, the cost to you for lack of fly control of about $45 per head per year. So that's pretty expensive. Okay, we're wrapping this thing up. Let's take a look at some takeaways. What I'd really like for you guys to finish us up with. Number one, your sound nutrition program. It's critical for productive, cost-effective cattle operation. It's one of the three legs that this thing stands on. Compromised nutrition is expensive. Yes, it costs something to put supplements in. It costs something to establish good pastures or make good hay, but compromised nutrition will cost you way, way more. We have to manage both the pluses and the minuses, the inputs and the outputs. The focus on nutrition and delivery of nutrients needs to start at conception. You need to be looking at that from the time that cow is with that bull and when the fertilization occurs. Nutrient delivery to the embryo and fetus is going to affect the health and performance the entire life of that animal. I don't care if that cow lives to be 20 years old. It's gonna how she was managed while she was in the uterus will affect her performance. The manager has to understand the animal requirements and how they vary. They have to recognize that the forage base provides and how it varies. Requirements and forage nutrients need to be matched to minimize the differences and minimize the needed supplementation. Supplements should be compared and evaluated for cost effectiveness, and this needs to be done continuously. And then finally, managing the minuses are equally important to managing the nutrition program. Reducing the amount of problems that you have with those agents that will take things away are critical to performance and profitability. So that's everything that I've got for you guys. I appreciate the time to be here and to visit with y'all, to discuss what we've discussed. I guess if you can see, if you have any other questions that we don't cover today, feel free to drop me an email or shoot me a text or give me a call or whatever. I'm more than happy to help if I can. And so I guess Stacy, I'll turn it back over to you. I think maybe we have some questions we need to cover.
We do have a few questions if you still have some time. Yep.
Oh, absolutely. I am good to go.
First, I've had a couple of people ask if they can get a copy of the slides. Are you okay with us sharing?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm more than happy. Let me send you this updated copy, and if they want to get them from you, that is perfectly fine.
What we'll do is we'll add it to the email that goes out tomorrow with the recording.
Awesome. That'll be great.
Good question. Okay. So I have a 1.5-year-old Angus heifer that was not weaned properly. The cow died and only weighs about 400 pounds. I would like to breed her, but I'm worried about calving with her. Thoughts, suggestions?
I guess my first question on that would be how old is this calf? If there's still some growth potential, I mean, if she's at 400 pounds right now, I would not recommend breeding her, because even if she gained, like say over the 9-month period of time, even if she gained 250 or 300 pounds, she's still a pretty small cow. So I would really try, if it's possible or feasible, to try to grow her a little bit more before you breed her. If you could grow her out to at least 600 or 650 pounds, that's still a little, for my personal preference, a little bit on the light end, but it's doable. I guess it'll depend a lot on what her remaining growth potential still is.
Okay, great. Another question, what about whole cottonseed and corn mix as a ration, and do you prefer whole or cracked corn? This assumes you have the facilities to do this.
Right, right. It's a good combination. Again, it's going to depend on what does that supplement need to look like. First off, kind of like what we went through. Take a look at what your forage base is. Take a look at how what you can or need to feasibly feed. I really like feeding whole cottonseed, like I said earlier, partly because there's some really good data out there that shows feeding whole seed to cows, even cows that are not in great body condition, it provides some fatty acids that work as precursors for reproductive hormones, and it will in fact help getting cows bred. I would prefer if you were going to create a mix like that. Well, you mentioned whether you use whole corn or cracked corn. Probably, in feeding a small group of animals, it's not that critical. A lot of people are concerned that if we feed intact corn, that we're not getting a lot of the starch and the energy value out of it. It's interesting, though, to know that even with whole corn, you do actually get quite a bit of the starch. In a perfect world, it's probably better to crack it. I wouldn't, in that type of a feeding situation, I wouldn't crack it or grind it real fine. I'd prefer to stay with a little bit bigger particle, I guess. So, but yeah, the two of those together would work very, very well.
Okay, great. We got another one here. The grass in a pasture that I have not grazed for a while has grown to be at 12 inches high and has developed seeds at the top of the stem. The cows now just eat around it, and it is not the cow's first choice. Should I mow the grass down to about 4 inches and let it grow back to a height before the seeds appear and turn the cows into that pasture at this time?
Probably not a bad idea. That tall rank stuff is not going to have a very good nutrient value. Like you said, they're sticking their head down and they're grazing the shorter stuff. And again, it's like we talked about earlier. When that stuff gets tall and rank, you've lost an awful lot of nutrient value. A lot of bulk there. There's a lot of volume there, but nutritionally not too hot. I would probably suggest I would go along with what you suggested, and go ahead and maybe mow it or shred it back. You can now. The thing is, you can do with that bigger grass like that. You can actually probably supplement the protein on it and get some utilization out of it, but probably the standpoint of improving the quality of that forage, yeah, go ahead and cut it back and let it regrow, because that regrowth is going to be very, very, assuming you got the moisture the moisture conditions, that regrowth should be a pretty nutritious product.
Okay, great. Where would you recommend in Texas for forage and/or range cube nutritional analysis services?
Okay, there's several laboratories you can go to. The Texas A&M does some analysis. There's a lab up in Lubbock. It's A&L Laboratories. They do quite a bit of pretty good analyses. I tend to use a lab that's based out of Missouri, and it's called Custom Laboratories. I've been using them for 25 years, and they're very good. They're very fast. Honestly, if you go, it really doesn't matter that much where you go to, because they're going to all use fairly similar analysis procedures. But it makes sense to look at what they can analyze for, what their costs are. You can go on the internet and just do a search for forage testing labs, and that works really well. And you can find, again, there's several right here, kind of in the central U.S. that are quite good.
Okay, great. Are you seeing any resistance developing to Altosid?
Not that I'm aware of, but the one thing that I have found over the last couple of years is I've gotten some calls, people saying, okay, Alticid's just not working for me. But then it comes down to really looking at what the situation is, how those cows are being managed, because you have to remember that a feed through fly control is not a be all to end all. I mean, if you feed that material, if you feed Alticid to a cow, and I'm going to assume at this point in time, yeah, there could potentially be a certain amount of resistance, but I'm not really inclined to say that I'm saying that. Where I'm situations where a producer's not getting the fly control that they think they should be getting, there are some other variables there that come into play. I mean, it depends on, how well the cattle are eating, whatever the supplement, if it's a mineral, if it's a tub, whatever the case might be, how well are they eating that? Are your neighbors doing anything? A fly can travel 1, 2, 3 miles, so flies can come from a long distance. There's some variation in terms of, like, if you're looking at a group of mature cows or a group of growing calves or heifers or something, we do see some differences in terms of how the different fly control products work. The other thing with Alticid, like we talked about earlier, Alticid is good for horn flies. I mean, that's the main thing that it will control for. The flies that you're seeing may not be horn flies. They may be some other species like we talked about. So I'm going to answer that most directly by saying, not that I'm aware of, but there are an awful lot of variables involved.
So along those same lines, is there a need to rotate the IGRs too?
I don't think so. And I would, and mainly because, I don't necessarily know that we're seeing a resistance. What it really boils down to is really understanding fly control. And, and Stacy, if you like, I've got a couple of things that I've developed on that, a couple of articles that I've written on that. I can send that to you, and you can attach it to, whatever you're doing. So if people want access to that, they're welcome to it. There's way more to the fly control thing than just simply putting a product out there in a mineral or a tub or feed or whatever the case might be.
Perfect. And yes, I think everybody would be interested in any of that. So
okay, I will send that to you this afternoon.
Perfect. Thank you. We got a couple of questions here on silage that I'm going to try to combine. So on silage,
sure.
How do you know how to value the nutrition in the silage that you buy? Is it really a substitute for hay, and would you only use it when grass is not available?
Okay. The only way to really value, especially with like in a cow-calf operation, to value that, number one, you have to base it on a dry matter basis. It has to be, take all the moisture out. If you're looking and compare that to the value of say dry hay, and do the same thing there. Because when we try to value silage with all the moisture, all the water still in it, it doesn't look very good. So you have to do it based upon that, and you have to do that compared to what dry hay is costing, and then what the protein value of that hay, of like that dry hay is. And this is that's probably as complex of a question as you could ask, because there aren't a whole lot of really good answers for how to value silage. And now, the other side of that is you have to look at the different types of silage. I've got folks that I work with that put up Bermuda grass silage or haylage. They do it with ryegrass. Some of them actually do it with corn silage. It depends a lot on what you need to supplement. If you're looking at like hay and needing to provide for the protein component, then it works extremely well. It works. The thing about a lot of silage and particularly on haylage is once cows get used to it, they just love it. I mean, they will clean up silage where they won't necessarily clean up dry hay. And so so there's a lot of value that comes with, you know, not having a whole lot of waste. You know, feeding it, said something about feeding it instead of hay. Sure, not a problem. You know, again, you need to give the cows a chance to get adjusted to it, because it smells different and it tastes different. And then Stacy, what was the last question? I've kind of rambled and I've forgotten.
It was, let me go back and find it. Sorry, we've done a lot today. Would you only use it when grass is not available?
No, it's a, you know, silage is, you know, is a good, you know, it's a good, it like you take, for instance, if we're looking at corn silage, it can be a really good energy source. It's like everything else. It has its place. And if you, you know, if you know what your grasses look like, you know what the silage looks like, that type of thing, you know, you can use it as a good total program.
Okay. Got a couple of questions on the, and I'm going to butcher it, diflubenzuron products,
Sure.
and what those were, and then can you find it in a free-range mineral?
Okay. Can you find it in a free-range mineral?
Uh-huh.
Yes, you can. It is not going to be as prominent as it was. It's not as prominent as Altosid or as Methoprene is. Again, because we're just starting to figure out we can use it in free choice products. There are some companies that are offering it on a commercial basis. The easiest way to get it done, especially if you've got enough to where you have enough cows that you could say buy a ton of custom, you know, say a ton of custom manufactured product, they will actually formulate it into your specific product. So yeah, it's definitely out there. Unfortunately, you might have to look just a little bit, and you know, and honestly, if anybody's interested and you'd like, shoot me a note, and I can probably help you chase it down.
Perfect. We've got, is it important to use a finishing feed on an animal that you're going to butcher?
Kind of depends on what kind of finish you want on that calf. What kind of carcass do you want? You know, there's an awful lot, we're seeing it nowadays. There's an awful lot of folks that are grass feeding cattle, and you know, grass fed beef doesn't, you know, you don't see very much, you know, you don't see a lot of intramuscular fat. You don't see a lot of exterior fat on those animals, but a lot of folks like it because they think it tastes good. They like the healthfulness of a grass-fed animal, and that type of thing. So the question kind of becomes, it really depends on, well, it depends not just on what you want your beef to look like and taste like, but it also depends on how fast you want to get it done. Because, you know, if you feed a finishing feed to that calf, you know, you can put 3 or 4 pounds per day gain on that calf. Grass-fed, you know, non-finishing fed cattle are going to be considerably less. They may be down in the 1.5 to 2.25 pound gain per head per day range. So again, it's another one of those things. It depends a little bit, mainly because, you know, it depends on what you want to get done.
Okay, great. Should round bales be put out whole, or is it better to unroll them to help the pasture as well as making more available to cattle?
That depends on who you ask. I'm not a real big, you know, rolling out round bale proponent. The main reason for that is because I've seen too many situations where, you know, you roll these things out, and you're right. I mean, it does help provide, you know, more better. It provides better access to the hay by a large group of cows, but you still get an awful lot of wastage in that situation. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not a big proponent. I can't really tell you one is all that much better than the other. It kind of depends on who your research, is done by, because there's studies that have been done comparing that to feeding it in all different kinds of feeders and feeding it without a feeder and things of that nature. And so again, it's really, and it also has somewhat of an effect on you, like your soil type. It seems to work. Rolling them out seems to work a little bit better on sandy soils than on like heavy clay soils where you have an awful lot of mud, and that kind of thing. What I suggest for people to do is to try it both ways. Give it a try, see how it works for you, see if you're satisfied with the amount of, how the cows eat it, with the amount of waste that you get, and then go with what works the best for you. And so that's probably not a very good answer. That's probably, but it's about the best one I've got.
That's perfect. All right. Well, I think that's all we have. We've gone about an hour and a half of great information. So thank you so much. There was a comment about thank you for this great webinar. And I agree. You did a great job today, Dr. Blesinger. And thank you so much for the information that you shared.
Thank you for having me, Stacy.
Absolutely. Again, we did record this session. It'll be available in an email to you tomorrow, along with the slides as well. And we'll send those out. But if you have any questions, just let us know. Be on the lookout for more webinars from Cattle Raisers. On Friday, we'll have our weekly market update at 2 o'clock. So we hope you'll join us for that. If you haven't registered, you can look on our website at tscra.org for more information on that weekly market update. And with that, we appreciate all of you being on today and appreciate your support. As members of Cattle Raisers, we couldn't do this without you and your support of our organization. And even during these tough times, we're working hard on your behalf. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Dr. Blesinger.
You're welcome. Thanks, Stacy. I appreciate it. Y'all take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.